Okay, so the reason I talk about this subject is because I discovered an interview with David Bowie, who was not an architect, of course, and he said it very clearly that to be an artist is almost by definition related to being dysfunctional, that all artists in a way are more or less dysfunctional. And I believe there is some truth here. And his truth relates to the truth of Charles Baudelaire, who said that an artist is like an albatross, the big bird which can fly but cannot walk. And in that sense, the artist is dysfunctional because he or she cannot really walk. I mean, is inadequate for what we call reality. Most artists, poets, writers, they have a difficult time on earth. They love the world and they love nature. They love maybe even human beings. They love the human drama. They inspire themselves from it. But at the level of so-called normal life, they are really inadequate. Most of them are crippled. They don't function easily. That's why we have the poets die the youngest, the architects live the longest. Well, maybe now, in a way, what I'm trying to talk about here is an architecture made by architects who are poets, and I'm not wishing that they die at an early age like the poets, but coming back to the albatross mentioned by Charles Baudelaire, indeed, the artist is the one who has no problem to open his or her wings and fly through imagination, through poetry, through dreaming. But if you ask the same artist to pay the rent or to pay some bills or to handle bureaucratic matters, the artist collapses, is unable to function, is lost in the Kafkian's castle. So I think in many ways, many artists are very, very vulnerable, very fragile at the level of so-called normal life. The architect, on the other hand, although there is an artistic side to the architect through the very nature of what he or she practices is more able to negotiate with society, with life. And maybe that's one explanation why architects live long lives. And very rarely they die in embarrassing ways. Louis Sullivan was one of the very rare examples of architects who later in life didn't arrive actually at the fruits of a labor of great significance, and he was one of the great architects. There are probably others less known. Anyway, the word dysfunctional is used in social work, in psychology, as referring to problematic relationships, usually within the family or at the level of society, of a social group. But how would a dysfunctional architecture be? I am asking myself. So let me begin the journey into this field. Searching for these images with dysfunctional architecture, I came across this image which I like. And although I might not explain it very well to myself first, but I kind of like it, because in a way I recognize myself in one of these three human beings, meaning, am I known by myself? Am I known to myself? Not really, if I am to be honest. I mean, yes, I look in the mirror. Yes, I think I know myself, but do I really? I think I am unknown to myself in many ways. So in a certain way, I am a problem, both to myself and to others. Form follows fiction. This is what Bernard Tschumi said. And, we might not agree with him, but in his provocative way, I think he's saying something that shouldn't leave us indifferent. its majesty, function, can be dethroned. After all, what is function? What is it, that is so untouchable, so, sacred, that we cannot question it, And I have seen in old cities, in old houses, a neglect for what we call function, and yet there are beautiful old cities and beautiful old buildings which are very pleasant to live in, and yet they were not born from the strict scripture that tells us form follows function. So, I am trying to illustrate this, that this function could be actually productive, could be actually beneficial. And to stay away from dysfunction could actually mean to stay away from the possible positive effects of what so-called dysfunction could bring to us. This is what Friedrich Kiesler said, and it might be that tomorrow is actually his birthday, and I will present his work in detail. But this is what he said: I oppose to the mysticism of hygiene, which is the superstition of functional architecture, the realities of a magical architecture rooted in the totality of the human being and not in the blessed or accursed parts of this being. So again, he is attacking the superstition of functional architecture, and he advocates the benefits of the magical architecture. What is that magical architecture? Well, maybe that magical architecture could relate to magical human beings who allow themselves to show themselves to the world and to themselves as they really are, with dreams, with weaknesses, with capriciousness, with troubles, with everything that constitutes the human being, which we try so carefully to hide away from in our simplistic and dogmatic and frigid white rectangular buildings. I'll show you now. I discovered, because I searched on Google Images for dysfunctional architectures, and I came across the works of this man I never knew before anything, Emilio Lopez Galeacho, where he says, I like to think of dysfunctional landmarks and Hotel Troya, these were two works he did, as high-resolution architectural machinima. I don't know what machinima is. Anyway, these are works that talk about the promiscuity of genre and typologies, the closeness between the monumental and the monstrous, the anomalous attraction, scale as an aberration, representation as a trap, and function as a nightmare. Yes, I would say it myself again, function as a nightmare. His gaze is not guilty, but distant and objective, strictly empirical. These images are not intended to denounce anything. They are cold, dispassionate, almost scientific records, no perspectives, no only elevations of that which lives hidden and concealed in the mind of the architect. Goya put it well: the sleep of reason produces monsters. But el sueño de razón produce monstruos, the title of a famous engraving by Goya, could also be translated differently, with a different nuance. Instead of the sleep of reason produces monsters, and I found it actually translated in this way, the dream of reason produces monsters. But sleep does not generate only dreams, it also generates nightmares, which are negative dreams, if we are to call them so. But let's contemplate again these words: what lies hidden and concealed in the mind of the architect. It is true, there are many things that are hidden within our soul, so to speak, in our mind. And the psychoanalyst tries to bring to the surface what is hidden. But the architect is very good at avoiding what is uncomfortable in maybe in his own soul, in his own mind, and then to a larger extent in the minds and the souls of those he serves. I think it's very, very important to try to dig deep and to yes, to attempt to access what is hidden, and also to ask ourselves, why are we hiding something? So Emilio Lopez Galeacho is an architect, visual artist, and composer. What an interesting triad. In 1992, he co-founded Arquimedia, a group focused on the relationship between new media, architecture, and communication. He is deputy publisher and art director of Frontera D digital magazine. I'll just show some images that this man produced. And they are puzzling. Of course, you know, if you are to build a building, you might not indulge in building it in this way. But I found his images enticing, you know. Actually, if something like this was built, I would probably be very curious to arrive around it and to explore it, to see it. You know, look at this, you know, of course we recognize parts of this architectural collage, certain parts, but not everything. And actually the most provocative are those that we do not identify easily. What are these things? What are these machineries? You know, is this collage of, you know, building structures or fragments of structures or fragments of architectures fly? Are they rooted on earth? But all in all, there is something that is provocative, because I think indeed he was trying to reveal the unknown, the hidden here as well. Architects, of course, this could be called very conveniently fantasias, you know, fantasies. And in a way they are, of course, but I think it's important to access what we call the fantastic within ourselves. I think Fyodor Dostoevsky, the great Russian writer, was correct when he said that true reality is not what we call reality or the real. That's not real. What is true reality is some kind of a mixture between what we call reality and the fantastic. The fantastic does exist, is within ourselves. It reveals itself partially during the sleep at night. Sometimes in our reveries or in our contemplative moments, we also have access to that side of ourselves, which usually we stay away from. So that's why I think this works like this, without describing them as being, you know, totally feasible or buildable. They are expressions of what happens when the irrational erupts, and when the irrational is allowed to manifest itself, at least to an extent. So in this sense, I think his images are, you know, interesting, because it's almost some kind of a, how to say, assemblage between what we expect, between the already seen, the predictable, and then there is the unexpected, the provocative side, which emerges, erupts from within ourselves. You know, I think that if we explore the depths, the jungle sometimes, the night, the darkness, the complexities of our dreams, our architecture would be different. But we don't do that. You know, we are so happy to find refuge within the rectangular paradigm and within the Neufert, you know, dogmas, that we forget that we are actually much richer than what reason imagines we are. Anyway, I'm not saying that these works are, necessarily, masterpieces to be followed. They are explorations of a side of reality which we usually ignore. In a way, they are psycho architectures. Dysfunctional by Carpenter's Workshop Gallery in Venezia, in Venice. This was in 2019. Was an exhibition with this name, Dysfunctional. So 2 years ago in Venice. And this is easier to, to comprehend, because actually you have here a number of objects which usually we don't conceive of in this way, like look at this chair. It's obviously a vulnerable chair. In an explicit way, it is a little bit dangerous, but isn't this chair in a way a possible self-portrait of almost any human being? Aren't we all to an extent wounded? I think we are. And we forget this. We think that we are invincible. We think that we are, even the pandemic didn't manage to make us self-reflective enough to understand that we are in a way like this chair. We give the impression that we can still function, but with some difficulties. Anyway, this was an exhibition in 2019 in Venice. Look even at this clock. Is it measuring time? I mean, is it working properly? Well, not really. It's so even our obsession with watches. We have an unbelievable amount of watches in the world. I mean, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of kinds of watches. Every person probably has a few instruments or gadgets that measure time. We have it on the laptop, we have it on the wall, we have it at our wrist. We measure time with unbelievable exactitude. But the truth is, time in its essence is still escaping us. So maybe this installation in Venice is kind of, a commentary on that we shouldn't be so sure that our measurement of time is truly and impeccably so-called functional. What is this? Art does what it's good at, that is, problematizes our expectations, and all kinds of imperfections or dysfunctions are illustrated through its unending series of imaginings or provocations. Anyway, but when we talk about dysfunction, we talk about disequilibrium, about a lack of balance. So how is an unstable architecture? Usually we think that architecture is supposed to be stable, but there are architects, Peter Eisenman is just one of them, that seem to actually desire instability, not stability. And I think this is a subject for reflection that is needed. Architecture and instability. Instability is scary indeed, yes, because it takes away, the illusion that everything is under control, that we are safe. So an unsafe architecture, an unstable architecture, is making us uneasy. The Lacanian villa that was designed in a school of architecture in Texas under the guidance of a Spanish architect, Gonzalo Vallo, who lives and works in Vienna. Now look at this. Is this a functional house? First of all, we wouldn't even call it a house. Why is the name of Lacan invoked? Because he was an important psychoanalyst. What does psychoanalysis have to do with architecture? Well, it's like asking, what does my inner life have to do with architecture? Of course it does. It's just that somehow, conventionally, architecture keeps avoiding the darker truth about ourselves. Yes, there is now a concern with the cave. Many architects, in one way or another, invoke or evoke the cave. But here is a tormented and tormenting cave, you know, and what is it, you know? What the hell is this? Could we call it a house? Well, with difficulties. Did we see such a house before? Not really. But isn't this house, it could be, let's say, it could be a house. It's represented as a house, and it was designed by an architecture student in not too long ago. Is this house telling the truth about life, about ourselves? Well, you know, it's subjective, of course, but maybe it says something about the torments, our inner torments, which they do exist. And if we neglect the inner torments, in my opinion, you neglect something that, for example, the creator of the Swiss pavilion at the Venice Biennial in 2016 tried to evoke. And I'm going to show two Swiss pavilions. Interesting that these two Swiss pavilions, and they both received the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennial, were produced by a country you wouldn't associate normally with instability and being unsafe and so on. This is Switzerland. This work by Christian Keres is a very interesting work. I have seen it. I was there. I entered it. And this, you'll see that it's not a big difference between what he built actually and the previous project that you saw, the Lacanian villa designed by that student in the School of Architecture in Texas. Why would Switzerland propose such a pavilion within the Venice Biennial? I think in the same quest, and here maybe it's not totally unnecessary to mention that one of the greatest psychoanalysts in the world was Swiss, that is Carl Jung. You know, again, the functionalist would say, well, how can I bring the piano in? Or how could I walk straight to I don't know what room without hitting myself or without some difficulties? But why should difficulties be totally banished? Why? You know, and what do we gain from the obsession with comfort? You know, what? It's only an illusion, because you can get crazy in the most functional apartment or house or building in the world. So it's not, you know, I mean, you could call this a monster. It's an architectural monster. Yes, it's white or whitish, but look at the shape and the form. They are monstrous. They are irrational. They are eruptions. They are not logical Apollonian constructs. No, they are you know, unbearable, you know, and the inside is, look at it, you know, no one could live like this. But isn't our mind somehow similar to what we look at here? I mean, is our mind a cube or a square? I doubt it. So, you know, yes, in order to walk through this space is difficult. But why do you think these people entered? Why do they stare? Why do they walk through it? Because it is enticing, and maybe there is an untold truth about this space, which the Cartesian, simplistic, diagrammatic, frigid and sterile structures that we build say nothing about. You know, I think the Swiss seem to know something that perhaps all of us should know, should attempt to know. What made these people leave their shoes outside of the cavern, of the cavernous inside, and step in? Curiosity, curiosity, the desire to experience something which in so-called normal life they don't experience. The attraction of the dysfunctional. And actually, the dysfunctional is associated almost by definition with pleasure. Well, with pleasure and its twin, pain. Because as Leonardo da Vinci thought and said, pain and pleasure are twins, and indeed they are. But when you eliminate one, and this is what functionalism does, it attempts to eliminate pain, and in the process of eliminating pain, it also eliminates pleasure. Because what kind of pleasure can you have when you always work on the same corridor, 1 meter and 20 centimeters wide, with a ceiling at 2 meters and 40 centimeters above you, with mostly whitish walls, with doors on the left and on the right? What kind of pleasure? It's an already seen. It's a deja vu. It's something deadly boring. So yes, we eliminated the pain, but in the process, we also eliminated its twin, that is pleasure. Here, you might have pain, but you also have the pleasure of an adventure. Such an interior means, if you assume it, is generating curiosity and pleasure. Besides, again, symmetrically looking at it, probably an unavoidable amount of pain. Anyway, so this was the Swiss pavilion in 2016. And now look there. You know, these rational human beings, you know, descendants of Homo sapiens, leave their shoes outside and enter into this so-called unreal, you know, environment that offers them an experience which they don't normally have in the midst of their so-called normal lives. Anyway, we are going to see a second pavilion done also by the Swiss, in a very different from this one, but somehow with the same message: the potentiality of dysfunction. So maybe looking back, the Lacanian villa was not such an aberration as maybe at first we might have been tempted to consider it. 2018, another pavilion, also by Swiss, very different, but somehow the message is not very dissimilar. So curated by a team of Swiss architects, including Alessandro Bochard, Lille, Tavor, Matthew van der Plug, and Annie Wilhervara. The installation is called Switzerrat 240, house tour, and draws inspiration from interior photographs of unfinished apartments. Visitors circulate through a series of spaces that at first offer constructed views that make each new encounter look like a typical photograph of a brand new living space. But as the visitor enters each new room, piercing the momentary illusion of the stage perspective and suddenly participating in the space rather than experiencing it merely as a visual composition, it quickly becomes apparent that the rooms and fittings are rendered at unexpected scale. The doors, windows, and power outlets might be much larger or significantly smaller than expected, given the lack of visual context. Now here they are. At first I thought that these are the curators, but I don't think they are, because I have an image here actually later with the winners of the Golden Lion, also for Swiss architects. I don't know who these people are anyway, but look at the height of the kitchen counter. Now this is certainly dysfunctional. You know, it's in fact it's more than dysfunctional. It's not functional. You know, I mean, it's almost the height of a human being. You know, you would say, come on, you know, this doesn't work properly. But magical things happen when you modify or you alter the expected. Look at this door, which has a height smaller than the height of the human being who tries to go through it. You know, what does it mean to walk through a door which is, let's say, 1.5 meters? tall, or 1 meter and 60 centimeter or so. Towards the outside, there was nothing. It was, almost a banal, architectural context. But there are still some, like, for example, you have two doors, a huge one, a giant one, and a small one. And you wonder, why are there two doors of different sizes? Here we see, yeah, I mean, look at this, a giant window, and then a very small door towards which this person who is much taller goes towards. So this change in the expected dimensions of what we build could provoke reactions, could alert you, and being alerted is not a bad thing for consciousness. And look here, the handle of the door is at 2 meters or so, not at 90 centimeters. But isn't it interesting? I mean, all of a sudden, this change in the dimensions, in the dimensioning of various things, is problematizing what or who we are. I mean, this person is an adult, and she seems to be, very small, even smaller than a child, you would say, because of that handle and the dimensions of the door. So here we see, again, a play with different dimensions, which could be disorienting, but something happens, I think, which is beneficial potentially in being unsettled, in being, look at these giant doors and look at this one. The handle is at a higher level than the top of this door. So it's in a way like in a dream. It's not. It seems to be not real. But I think the unexpectedness is increasing our involvement with what is around us. It alerts us, and as I said, the discomfort could provoke that curious and paradoxical pleasure, which is somehow connected with, again, in a paradoxical way, with pain. Again, we have seen this one. Look at this, isn't it surreal somehow? You see this child who is, I mean, you would say this door is for children, but it's for everyone, and you can, if you modify the restrictions or the recommendations of Ernest Neufeld, you create dynamics without necessarily creating very dynamic forms. You just modify, you alter the expected, the predictable, like here, it's a discomfort, it's a dysfunction, but this dysfunction, I think, could have very beneficial effects. Look at the lady on the right. She became a child again. You can see on her face that is this astonishment, this wondering, and I wonder how many so-called functional apartments or buildings or houses could provoke such an expression on the face of anyone. Almost none. But I think if we can build in such a way to provoke this kind of reaction, as the facial expression of this person shows us, we are making something that is perhaps more worthy of being made. Because these people here, you can tell they are all enjoying themselves. Look at this one, eager to photograph. The other two also, they become children or children-like, discovering the world anew. So this function could be actually very functional, in the sense that it stirs up emotions, hidden parts of ourselves that perhaps need to be activated. These are the 4 curators of the second Golden Lion, the Swiss got. Bravo to them. 2 years, in a row, so to speak, they got the Golden Lion in Venice. And that is because they challenged our assumptions. They challenged the predictable. They brought in the unpredictable. Okay, against functionalism. I wrote a while ago, not too long ago, 2-3 years ago, this text. I hope I can read it. It's not funny. It's called Against Functionalism. It is not funny. It is not exciting. It is plain boring. Life should not be comfortable, but challenging. Functionalism is not challenging. There is no struggle involved. Things are so-called perfect. So we navigate through functionalist spaces like a duck in the water. No water stains. Who needs that? We need the struggle. We need the discomfort of the pioneers who, entering a virgin forest, did not and do not find conventionally built asphalted walkways. Give us back discomfort. Fuck functionalism. It is highly dysfunctional, this gray, mediocre functionalism, because for our soul and our thirst for a much needed sense of adventure, it is boring like hell. We don't need it. We need danger and discomfort. We need to feel alive, like a rejected lover in quest for the affection of the loved one. Process is everything. The way to give us back discomfort and bury Neufeld. Give us dejection and struggle, painful struggle. The more, the better. Give us dysfunctionalism. We would love it with the same ardor the dejected lover loves the object or subject of his or her desire. Give us back desire. Give us a feeling that we are still needed on this earth, that not everything was solved. Fuck functionalism. Factionalism. Sorry for the non-academic wording. So Eduardo McIntosh, capitalist symbiosis. Well, I don't know exactly what he meant, but I like the images. I don't know why he called them as he did. I see discomfort here. I see dysfunctions somehow, in a way relating to the first works that I showed. This collage of various architectural entities, possibly architectural entities. And I think if we free our imagination from dogma and inhibition, we can create an architecture that is truer to life than the simplistic variations that we arrive at in following the prescriptions of the priests of rationalism. Günther Dominique, I showed his work before. I show you again this Z-Bank bank in Vienna. Towards the outside is a mosque, but inside, unfortunately, when I visited it, there was a luggage store inside, but you'll understand that the space this architect created had nothing to do with this function of displaying luggages. You see the luggages here, but above is something else. And there is this obvious tension and conflict between the vision of the architect and the banality of the function the building arrived at, serving, being rented in this sense, the space. But initially it was a bank, if you can imagine. And then the bank, I don't know, ran out of business or moved somewhere else, and the space was rented for a seller of luggage. But, the banality of displaying in a predictable way the luggage does not take away from the drama of these psychopipes that he is, they are physical, all right, but in a way, it's almost like a trip into our own psychological reality, into our soul, into our mind. Is contorted. Is because, yes, I don't think that our inner life was drawn by God or whoever drew it with the T-square and the rectangle. Now, sorry about the luggage. I prefer to concentrate on the architecture, and this architect did a good job, a very good job with this building. And he did it before deconstruction, actually. And this is not quite deconstruction. It's a little bit different because it has a level of organicity. But I still think it refers to dysfunction. And maybe it's a dysfunction that existed within the architect himself. An unhappy man, maybe, you know, a man troubled by his own demons, an albatross, in other words, a poet. Anyway, an unusual, a very unusual bank, and I chose it as another example. There are others, of course, of what I might call dysfunctional architecture. Well, you know, this picture amuses me because these people look at the pieces of luggage that they want to purchase. They all look down. They don't look up because what is up, they prefer to ignore. And in a way, this is what architects do. We look down, so to speak, to the necessities of, you know, functional necessities of our buildings. And we forget to look up at the clouds that move so freely and so beautifully above our head. Now, I'm not saying here that is parallel. I mean, that is the same thing with the movement of the beautiful clouds, but it shows another reality, a dysfunctional one, if you want. Look, even the concrete parts, you know, which are mysteriously Gothic sometimes, although this building is a modern building. I mean, it was built around 50 years ago. But this reference to a different kind of architecture, you know, maybe a little bit like Rudolf Steiner or, you know, a certain brutalist architecture, but it's organic, it's mysterious. You wonder, what is it doing here? Well, what it's doing here is unsettling us. That's what it is doing here. And it's good. We should say thank you, Mr. Dominique, for unsettling us. In as much as the entrance into the now store, former bank, is unsettling us. Look at the canopy, which with its visceralities. Anyway, the amusing world of you know, backpacks for school, now that the school opened, now the pictures were taken a few years ago, and the world of architecture, very, very different. Anyway, moving forward, and even the pavement in front of the building is problematizing the trajectory of our you know, walking, because it's not straight. It's yes, it is confusing a little bit. Now I discovered an interesting website. Belongs to SOCKS, and there I found dysfunctional plans. And I don't show here a lot, maybe, you know, a few pictures, but I suggest to you, if you are interested, to take a picture of this, or a screen, you know, to remember this website, because I think it's a very interesting website, and it shows alternative ways of doing architecture. So dysfunctional plans, the floor plan is a reflection of the societal conditions and the historical context in which it is created, thus embodying specific notions of privacy, familiar bonds, or social relationship among inhabitants. Whenever the plan doesn't interpret the notion of inhabiting within the parameters of what is considered normality in a specific moment in history, we call it dysfunctional. A dysfunctional plan implies a questioning and a critical resistance towards any notion of standardization. Through configurations of non-canonical spaces, it problematizes any comfortable accommodation for the daily living functions, and may even become a means of conflict, misbehavior, and abuse. On the other hand, it may represent an attempt to embody hypotheses of subversion against a given model. And it is true. We might even one day meet in order to talk about subversive architecture. The architecture of madness. These are heliographias by this person, Leon Ferrari. The architecture of madness. You'll see some. So Leon Ferrari, sorry, an L is missing, was an Argentinian conceptual artist who worked with a series of extremely different medias through the years. Trained as an engineer, he gained notoriety in the 60s thanks to his polemical works on religion and politics. Exiled in 1976 in Brazil, he started a series of plans using heliography, the technique traditionally employed by architects until the advent of the computers in order to reproduce their drawings. Combining letter set icons to hand sketches, he invented labyrinthic worlds, which became part of a series called the Architecture of Madness. And you'll see now some pictures. It is madness indeed, but probably from space, the human activities do not look very different from what we see here. These are, yes, maddened labyrinths with a void in the center. Cars, and again cars, but cars unregulated by restrictions or laws or rules. Anyway, from a far point of view, the large images look as chaotic patterns of walls, people, furniture, and cars. At a closer look, it is possible to realize that the symbols stage paradoxical situations in which people line up to enter empty spaces or are confined in a series of small cubicles. The paradoxes can be read as metaphors of contemporary cities where alienated individuals wander without any apparent logic through irrational urban patterns. The works turn the technical drawings into a narrative, a symbolic device filled with sarcasm. So you'll see some works by this man, commentary on collective life, but a collective life which is a sum of individual madnesses, perhaps. Anyway, I move a little bit quicker because we still have some more material to present. Here is the madness of repetitions, 1,000 doors or whatever. Anyway, not all pictures are very easy to read, but I thought that somehow they do have to do with what we call the dysfunctional. And yes, the dysfunctional can be discovered in many places and in many forms. Kop Himmelblau, Vienna apartment building. This is a building I saw with some students and also by myself. This is a building which has some so-called dysfunctional parts. And interestingly, I would say exactly the dysfunctional parts make the building stand out and be interesting and be engaging. Without the dysfunctional part, the building would be maybe okay, but maybe not enough, being just okay. It is the dysfunctional part that attracts attention. And yes, it was not built without resources. It was built with some efforts, perhaps financial, maybe in the first place, but I think it is worth it because it's some kind of a mask that testifies strangely about something that is behind the elevations of the conventional building. And it's almost like a betraying mask, a mask which tells a truth about the building, which without a mask would not have whispered it. I don't know if I explained correctly what I felt or thought. Anyway, it is a dysfunctional addition to an otherwise maybe functional building. In the back, well, there were 3 buildings built by the same architects. There is an incredible cantilever part and actually a gathering room, some kind of amphitheater, or I don't know what it is. You can house or protect or cover a group of a large group of people underneath it. Look here, it's emerging from the otherwise regular architecture behind it, and it is cantilever, and it's also red. I mean, you can't miss it. At first, I saw it accidentally being on the bicycle in Vienna, and it attracted my attention. I didn't know it was designed and built by Koch Himmelblau, but it did. So the color also is a disjunction, is disjunctive to the green of the trees. So you have two kinds of provocations. First, the significant, almost outrageous cantilever of this large room, and second, the chromatic provocation. Now, the Cleveland Clinic Lou Rouveau Center by Frank Gehry, it's also a provocation, a dysfunctional provocation, which also relates to the brain damage. It is a clinic used for treatment of brain disorders and brain illnesses, and the building expresses the tragedy, the pain, the suffering, the distortions, the problems with the brain, which was affected dramatically. This is the building. You probably know it. It has been published. Of course, it is. Of course, it is a building that if you want to get well, you might not be tempted to enter in, because the building is telling you that things are not all right on this earth, and your brain might actually, through its illness, might actually convey what the world at large conveys. It's, the works of Frank Gehry, but this one in particular also relating, to the functions that were to be served through this building, is amplifying somehow a certain amount of angst. The cars are running, of course, but the building is telling you, you run, but you cannot run from your inner truth and from your inner troubles, and perhaps even from your brain damage. So, Frank Gehry, brain clinic, if I am to call it so, and yeah, I laugh, but the building is almost ominous through its maybe truthful negative exuberance, if I am to call it so. Anyway, dysfunctionalism, architectural dysfunctionalism, with the honesty to show itself as such, and not with the dishonesty to lie about itself. Okay, and now we arrive at another building by Frank Gehry, which, in my opinion, is not bad, although some people criticize it. But I know that Frank Gehry inspired himself from the paintings of Van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh, who was a very troubled young man, actually, who lived there and who painted there furiously. And the fact that Frank Gehry wanted to find inspiration in, at least in some paintings by Van Gogh, shows to me that Frank Gehry is actually an informed architect. He's not just playing with forms. In this case, he found some kind of a metaphysical inspiration or artistic inspiration for his architecture. The tower. And the tower, after I read, I didn't know at first what inspired him, but he studied the paintings of Vincent van Gogh and tried to find some kind of an equivalent of his torments in life and in art through architecture. A difficult attempt, no doubt. And unfortunately, most of the time on the media, they see a relationship between this building and a specific painting by Van Gogh, but actually it was a different painting by Van Gogh that inspired this building. The base, though, is different, but the base makes a reference to a Roman amphitheater that is not too far away in Arles from where this tower was built. What interests me for this presentation is particularly this tower, the top part, because it is there where Frank Gehry tried to connect with Vincent van Gogh. And, you know, you would say, this is madness. This is dysfunctional, totally dysfunctional. This is a troubled building. Well, it was intended to be like this, to express the troubles of a major painter. And you would say, what for? Well, I think architecture, if it's true to its destiny and its essence, should not stay away from larger responsibilities. He could have built just another, you know, hotel or whatever, you know, in a conventional way, but he wanted to relate to a narrative that was connected to that place. And in this case, he chose to connect with the most important artist probably who ever lived and created there. And you see here the painting of Vincent van Gogh, but it was not actually this painting that influenced, but you can still see, even in this painting, I think Frank Gehry, at least the attempt that he chose to honor is something to appreciate, you know, to try to somehow through architecture to approximate, at least approximate something of the spirit of a worker, of a painter, a worker. He was a worker in painting, so to speak, who was tormented. And you know, if you think about his paintings, how could you make a, you know, a placidly indifferent painting, a building? How could you do that? Probably you couldn't. Anyway, so we see here these functions, you know, the dysfunctioning of the world. We don't have any longer the conventional world. Now, I'm not saying that inside the building we see the same physical realities like we see them at the outside, but still towards the outside, I think he tried to say something, you know, connecting with the painter we all know, but with whose troubles and sufferings and soul contortions we probably do not identify with, although we have our own. I'm convinced of it. Anyway, aggregate urbanism, adventures in ArchiCAD. You will see some sketches I did in ArchiCAD for a competition in Copenhagen, in Denmark, which is without doubt a very, very dysfunctional urbanism, but which I thought could be very provocative and you know, stir up urban energies and create yes, an urban dysfunction, but an urban dysfunction that could incite new ways of life and new ways of interaction, human interaction. This is the first sketch I did. I'll just show 4 plans. This is one. You see the existing buildings. Yes, I was trying to disrupt the existing order. Another attempt. How would a city or a town or a part of a city and a town be like and look like if it was like this or like this? You say, wait a minute, you didn't handle here the, you know, functions. It's true, I didn't. But there are suggestions for a different kind of urban, you know, conglomerate, if I am to call it a conglomerate, that could be, yes, painful and very difficult, but maybe interesting and provocative, not just in a negative way. And now, by the way of this, I'll show works by an interesting architect and educator, Peter Trummer, or Trummer. He's German or Austrian. He teaches at the Innsbruck School of Architecture. Is very interesting, and he showed this work at the Venice Biennial in 2012, and he calls this aggregate urbanism, and this is what he does. I mean, this is what he did then. Isn't it a dysfunctional urbanism? Of course it is, very much so. But if this was built, if these were buildings, I would have loved to wander through these buildings, if there were to be buildings. I would have been enticed, and it would have been inspiring, I think. But again, we should not forget what Leonardo da Vinci said: pain and pleasure are twins. So the pleasure would probably have been balanced by an equal amount of pain. The plan, or the top view, aggregate urbanism. He identified 5 kinds of urbanism, and this is the 5th, the one he considered at that time in 2012, the one appropriate for our time. It is an instability. It is about instability. It is about dysfunction. And here are the 5, ideograms describing the 5 during the human history, the 5 types of. Interesting that before the aggregate urbanism that he proposed is this, which is probably our urbanism, rationalistic, blunt and blank, and born from the sterility of dogmas and excessive trust in reason and so on. Is this one better than this one? I don't know. I will let you reflect on this. So here it is, his insertion, his proposal within an urban fabric, a larger urban fabric. You will say it is disorder. Yes, it is disorder, but disorder, as one philosopher put it, is another kind of order, or it could be another kind of order. Interesting that a mathematician in California invented the word dis-chaos. So we have order and disorder, it's opposite. But then we have chaos, but there is nothing to oppose chaos in the same way, symmetrically. So he thought of this chaos, but this chaos is not order, it's something else. So it would be very interesting actually to reflect to the possible meanings of the word this chaos and the difference between this chaos and order. This, I think, is not, I wouldn't call it actually chaos. I wouldn't call it order either, of course. Maybe it's this chaos, or maybe not. Anyway, Wolfprix in Perugia, again, Kop Himmelblau. I love this work by Kop Himmelblau. It's it's just a roof between these 2 buildings, but I think it's brilliant. It's dysfunctional. I mean, its function, it does have a function, an ecological function. It's an energetical roof, so to speak, but its contortions testify. I mean, this roof transcends function as we know it, and it becomes. Look at the complexity of the work. He actually built it together with the students there in Perugia, and isn't reality like this? We think reality is simple, is simplistic, is diagrammatic, is rational. No, it's not. It's rather a composition, a complex composition it's a hybrid reality of many parts, some contorted, some less contorted, but all in all, look at this. I think it is brilliant to make of something, so complex and so both organic and mysterious, in between 2 buildings. I don't think it's easy. They did it, and I do think this roofing is beneficially dysfunctional, although it does have a function. And this is the paradox I'm trying to somehow put forward, that in a certain way, what we call dysfunctionalism could be actually more functional than functionalism itself. In the contortions of dysfunctionalism, new possibilities are born, and those new possibilities could serve life much better than what we call functionalism. Anyway, bravo to them, to the architects and the students who did this. It's surreal, it's not of this world, but it was built on Earth between two existing buildings in an Italian town. You see, so-called normal life takes place here. And then in between these two buildings, we witness the otherness of good art and the otherness of good architecture. In essence, this relates with the clouds, and in essence, this relates to the albatross Charles Baudelaire talked about, symbolizing the artist who can fly but cannot walk. Okay, we move forward. We have a few more things to say, to see. Urban heterotopia. I like this word heterotopia, which seems to come from Foucault. You can find information or an entry about heterotopia on Wikipedia. And I am going to show something that maybe it will not surprise you very much. It's a fragment of the house where I spent my childhood in Transylvania, which was in at least in some respects dysfunctional. You know, first of all, there were no bathrooms at first. I had to bring water, you know, from downstairs where there was a room where water was running. We didn't have bathrooms. We shared toilets. I remember when I used to go to the school, I was living here on the second floor, and you know, I descended the stair, I crossed the bridge, and here then a neighbor came out with a pot with what her children produced during the night, because again, they didn't have a bathroom. We said hello to each other, we saluted, we interacted, we wished each other good day. I descended, it was life, something that is missing in a conventional block of flats. And you see these interstitial spaces. Yes, there was some discomfort, you know, most of the time of a so-called functional, you know, functional discomfort. For example, some apartments you enter through the kitchen. You know, the access into the apartment was through the kitchen. It was okay. Nobody died, and people lived long lives. So what I'm saying is our obsession with a very narrow understanding of what, or interpretation, because it might be an interpretation. It might be that Bernard Tschumi was right. Function is a fiction. So look at the entrance here in this, you know, it's very poor. And actually the height of this very old gate, which is 500 years old, is about 1.5 meters, like in the pavilion, the Swiss pavilion in Venice that we saw. It's okay. I mean, I hit it once because I was tall, because I was experimenting, walking without my eyes open, just like Wolf Prix and his partner experimented with doing architecture with the eyes closed. And I hit myself, you know, my forehead at the top of this gate. Anyway, the old machine in the old city. I took some pictures in my old hometown when some very old machineries, but very vigorous, very powerful, invaded the city to do some, to refurbish the streets. And I like the viscerality, the dysfunctionalism that irritated the domesticity of the building. You see the little bit of the building here, but this machinery, which looks almost demonic or diabolical for my imagination, I found them very interesting. And again, in a strange way, I see these machineries, these old machineries, somehow relating to my own soul, my own imagination, my Jungian shadows, whatever is within myself. I find in these so-called imperfections and dysfunctions some kind of a replica or a parallel reality which actually reflected my own. I like this. I like these things, you know. You could say I am something wrong with me, and it's possible. But I look. Here is the so-called normal life on the left, and this is the abnormality of the old machinery which was working on the road. Why is it that our architecture stays away from externalizing the drama of of the life of its citizens, of the life of the inhabitants? Why is it that we don't show that life and reality are much more complex than our sterile rectangular white walls? Now, here is a project was submitted by someone, maybe from Indonesia, I'm not sure, a project for a competition. I launched the House of Oxymorons. We still have a few more images and we end. He did a house, he proposed a house for a couple whose members suffered from contradictory sleeping diseases. They both had problems with sleep, but different illnesses. Let me see. Yeah, one suffered of insomnia and the other one suffered of narcolepsy, which means, I learned then, excessive daytime sleepiness. And insomnia, you know, problems to fall asleep. So they both met at night because they both couldn't sleep at night. One because he slept too much during the day, and the other one because he couldn't fall asleep. So an interesting idea, he imagined a house that would serve both, and it's like a dream house in a way. This would be the floor plan, but not very new in a way. I mean, there are people who work kind of in similar ways. So a house of the disturbed sleepers, caught between dream and reality. And you see, it's exactly what I'm trying to evoke, that somehow dysfunction, as we call it, provokes the possibility, encourages somehow the difficult meeting between what we call reality and what we call dream. It is exactly there in the midst of the conflict generated by dysfunctions that dream and reality interact and intersect. Just like in this conceptual project by this architect. Well, the cave motif reappears, of course, because the world of the unconscious is related to the to what we call dream, and so cave-like interiors are auspicious for the meeting between what we call reality and what we call dream. The house appears as a solid, shiny white box with some irregular shaped openings in its skin to show a little of its hidden inner world. And this is what dysfunction does. Dysfunction betrays the hidden inner world. Something we stay away from because, yes, it is painful often to witness the inner monsters. It is painful, but it's very possible that without doing that, we do not have access to a superior sense of pleasure and satisfaction and accomplishment. Anyway, now we see a project sent from New York City, the House of Conflict. I will not insist on it, but it was about bringing the opposites together in the same way the previous project thought of bringing together two people suffering from different, opposing almost sleep disorders. Here it's also about disorder. The disorder of an apartment, which is actually real, because when we design an apartment or a house or a building, we do not think about the realities of that life that they contain. We think about some kind of an idealized, simplistic, diagrammatic, schematic understanding of what life is. But life is not like this. Look, like here, we think the architect builds this apartment building, but these architects try to break the apparent order and the similarity of all the others here housed, and they created a different kind of a disjunctive reality, a dysfunctional reality within the building, which says nothing about disjunctions about dysfunctions. And yes, I think life, if it is true to itself, is not regular and is not deterministically and rationally pinned down. It is much more complex. Maybe it's not as tormented as a painting by Vincent van Gogh or that tower by Frank Gehry. But we all have doubts. We all have, inner dramas, more or less intense. Now, this is another project I received from Ukraine. And you see, in a way, this is what we are taught to build, and this is what we build. That is, if we are lucky or unlucky to build. But there is the other reality, the disturbing reality, the red reality, the inner fire. And the inner fire can challenge the prism. Is the dysfunction of the fire. It is the dysfunction of the challenge that this red thing places to the serenity, more or less serenity of the prism, is one that, in my opinion, is necessary. We need dysfunction. And this dysfunction is actually the dysfunction of a human being who thinks, who feels, who is not afraid to face the complex truth within himself. Now, towards a wounded architecture, you would say something wrong with me that I am aspiring towards a wounded architecture, but I think wounds do exist. It's also known that in ancient societies existed shamans who actually were wounded healers. It was only the wounded healer who was able to cure other people. So how would a wounded architecture be like? I show some examples before. I will show you some attempts to create a so-called wounded architecture myself through ArchiCAD, because that's the only software I use, besides not using the one I even received a diploma for, and that is ArchiCAD. Anyway, wounded architectures, dysfunctional architectures, very dysfunctional indeed. Yes, they are just sketches of possible architectures, pre-architectures, but they assume conflict. They assume the discomfort which makes possible a different kind of human interaction, one that does not say no to what is difficult, to what is unpleasant, to what is challenging, and what is apparently dysfunctional. So, why should a building be only rational? Well, because we are not only rational. And if we are to tell the truth about ourselves, we have to assume also different expressions of our truth. And several architects that I showed, or artists, try to do this. If we succeed, if we don't succeed, but the important thing is to try to assume the difficult challenge, that dysfunction, or you can use other terms to describe what is there, throw at us, because in a way that's what they do. They throw at us. Now, I will end the presentation with a reflection on where we are today. This is a book published by a professor at MIT, Sherry Turkle. She wrote a book, Alone Together. We all know that we cannot live without mobile phones these days, right? You see, everybody is with a mobile phone, everybody. And this you can see in every city of the world, and maybe even in villages, everywhere. What is this actually? Is it functionalism? I mean, is it serving life? In what way? Of course, we relate to each other through these gadgets, but aren't we addicted to them in the process? I think we are. You see, why we expect more from technology and less from each other? Well, So who is dysfunctional here? Is the technology or is us or both? We could ask this question. And I will end by showing images of this photographer, Eric Pickersgill, who removes smartphones to show our extreme device addiction, which is in itself dysfunction. It's a dysfunction which is presenting itself as an unavoidable function. This is a paradox, that another paradox, that the mobile phone or the smartphone seems to serve unavoidably the function of communication. But in the process of doing that, it alienates us from each other. So, function turns out to be deficient towards life. Dysfunction, on the other hand, could turn out to be actually positive. So, functionalism is very simplistic in its assumption that what rationally appears to be beneficial to life is so, and it's not. And in this case, the mobile phone, the smartphone, is actually doing a disservice in the name of doing us a service in our glorious age of communication. Now, of course, you could say you are a hypocrite, you are using Zoom. It is true. I am using technology like everybody else, and I'm happy I have this opportunity. Otherwise, it would have been more difficult. But when this man made these photographs, he made them before the pandemic. So under so-called normal conditions, we can very legitimately ask, are we not alone when we appear to be together by using these gadgets for communication? The use of technology for interaction in exchange for not interacting. And it's true. It's paradoxical again, because we use the smartphones to communicate with 30,000 people all over the world, while we're not even looking at the person near us. Look at these people at the table. So the photographer removed their smartphones from their hands. But aren't they alone? I think they are very much alone. They are very much alone, although physically they are together, but they don't pay attention to each other. They only pay attention to the gadget. So where is the dysfunction here? Well, the dysfunction was born from the excessive, the comfortable, the seductive functionalism of the smartphone, which tells you you can be together with anyone in the world. Yes, but with what price? By neglecting those in your own family at the same table. Look at this person, almost risking to be hit by a car or so, looking on the iPhone, and this is or on the iPhone or whatever, a smartphone. This is a very seen. I mean, a very common, sight these days. Look at these people, the mother and the daughter, alienated from each other. So where is the function, the beneficial function of the smartphone, when in fact, as a result, it's a clearly illustrated dysfunctionalism. Anyway, look at these people. Got married. They got married on the day. You see here, just married. But they are two strangers to each other. They look to this damn thing, to this gadget which promises paradise on earth, but which in fact alienates even two lovers who just got married. Isn't it bizarre? So again, maybe we should reflect on what function means, and maybe indeed it is a function. A fiction, as Bernard Tschumi said, it's possible. Or here, again, two people, but looking at their smartphones, not at each other, not talking to each other. And what to say about this? In fact, I regret that the photographer took away he should have left the smartphones in their hands. They are back to back. They are not facing each other. They are not together. I mean, they are together like two bodies, but they are looking at something else. So again, It's about the dialectics between function and non-function or dysfunction. Or here, 3 children together and yet alone, very much alone, although they are together. So where is the great benefit of our glorious age of communication, when in fact we are alienated from each other? And here, are they in love? I don't know. Are they really? Anyway, I'm not sure this part of my presentation is the most appropriate one to end my presentation with, but this is what I did. And I end now with it's a project sent from Sweden for the same competition I launched, the House of Oxymorons. I'm not going to show you the project. I just want to read the second page, the one on the right, that was presented in the project. It's from a book called American Psycho, and it's about protesting against the world of appearances, you know, where everything is just a surface, and you can actually see here, surface was all that anyone found meaning in. Surface, surface, surface. So in a way, it's the surface of functionalism, because functionalism gives the impression that everything is right, that there is no depth, that things are clearly cut, clearly projected, clearly built, and clearly lived in. And things are not like this. And I will end this presentation with this short excerpt from this book, American Psycho. Nothing was affirmative. The term generosity of spirit applied to nothing, was a cliche, was some kind of a bad joke. Sex is mathematics. Individuality no longer an issue. What does intelligence signify? Define reason. Desire, meaningless. Intellect is not a cure. Justice is dead. Fear, recrimination, innocence, sympathy, guilt, waste, failure, grief were things, emotions that no one really felt anymore. Reflection is useless. The world is senseless. Evil is its only permanence. God is not alive. Love cannot be trusted. Surface, surface, surface was all that anyone found meaning in. This was civilization as I saw it. As I saw it, colossal and jagged. Now, I live in this way, maybe not the most inspired way, but that was my presentation for today, and I thank you for being here. You are still here. I think I did something wrong. I don't know what I did.